The radio on my workbench hissed through the rain, pounding the tin roof of my shop. "Base to Cooper. Gabriel, you copy? We've got a critical failure at the main pavilion. The east-facing ridge beam is buckling under the water weight. The whole structure is compromised." I set down the orbital sander. The sudden quiet felt dense with tung oil, fresh cedar sawdust, and incoming disaster. I keyed the mic on my shoulder. "Copy that. Clear the perimeter. Shut off the main breaker to the pavilion so we don't have a live wire situation if the roof comes down. I'm on my way." I grabbed my leather tool belt, a battery-powered track saw, and a waterproof headlamp and threw them into the bed of my truck. The Cascade Mountain air was brutally cold for early September. A freak storm parked over the peaks. By the time I hit the muddy access road toward the central grounds, the wipers were barely keeping up. The scene snapped into focus under the sweep of the headlights. Guests in rehearsal dinner clothes huddled under the lodge overhang, staring at the outdoor pavilion. The canvas and timber structure meant to hold tomorrow's 300-guest wedding was leaning hard to the left. The primary beam had split down the center. One more hard gust and the roof would come down. I killed the engine, pulled on my canvas jacket, and walked toward the danger zone. The original event contractor, a man in a soaked designer coat, was yelling into his phone in the mud. Then I saw her. Elena Vance stood on the covered porch of the stone lodge, ringed by anxious bridesmaids and frantic caterers. She was not frantic. She was perfectly still, arms crossed against the cold, watching the pavilion fail. She wore a navy sweater and jeans, her dark hair pulled back in a severe knot. I had not seen her in 3 years. 3 years since I packed my tools into my truck in a Seattle driveway, looked at her high-speed life, and decided I was nothing but a temporary stop for a woman built for boardrooms and corner offices. I was 26 then, trying to get a custom furniture business off the ground. She was 32, already rising fast. I walked away before she could decide I was not enough. Now I was 29, head contractor for the entire mountain property, and I was about to tell her her carefully planned wedding was done. I stepped onto the porch. Water dripped from the brim of my cap. She turned. She went perfectly still. Rain tapped against the slate roof, and the hand wrapped around her phone tightened hard enough to blanch her knuckles. For one suspended second, neither of us spoke, and every panicked voice behind her seemed to fall back another 10 feet. "Gabriel," she said. Her voice was the same, grounded steady with that slight rasp at the edges. "Natalie," I kept my tone flat. "The pavilion is a total loss. The primary beam is compromised. The ground is too saturated for heavy equipment to brace it. You cannot hold an event in there tomorrow." The event contractor shoved onto the porch. "Listen to me, buddy. Natalie, I have $20,000 worth of imported white roses sitting in refrigeration, and a client who expects a mountain view altar by 4 tomorrow. We just need to prop it up." I did not look at him. "If you prop that up with temporary jacks in this mud, the lateral wind load will drop the roof onto your guests. It's a safety violation, and as the master contractor on this property, I'm red tagging the structure. Nobody goes in." He cursed under his breath and stormed inside to make another call. Natalie rubbed her left temple. Old tell. She only did that when her mind was running 12 failing variables at once. "He's right about one thing," she said quietly. "I have 300 people expecting a ceremony." My fiancé's executive board flew in this morning. If we cancel, it's a public relations disaster for him. My jaw tightened, but my voice stayed level. "The great room in the lodge is empty. It seats your guest list. It's dry-grounded and safe. There's no altar in there," she said, looking through the glass doors into the dark hall. "It's just an empty wooden room. I have a full lumber yard in my shop." The answer came before my brain caught up with what it meant. She was holding her own shoulders against the cold, staring at the wreckage of tomorrow. I could not leave her in it. "I can build the platform and arch. I can have it done by sunrise." She looked at me for a long second. Rain battered the porch roof. "You would do that. I'm the property contractor," I said. "It's my job to fix what's broken." By midnight, the great room smelled like fresh-cut cedar and cold mountain air. I had hauled in 6 rough-sawn cedar beams, set the altar platform over the uneven flagstone, and locked the joists down with structural screws. The impact driver echoed off the vaulted ceiling. I was not throwing together a prop. I was building a piece of architecture that would hold weight and not fail her. Near 2 a.m, I climbed the extension ladder and anchored heavy-gauge string lights to the wrought iron trusses. They fell behind the cedar arch like a curtain of warm stars. I climbed down, wiped sawdust from my hands, and checked the alignment. Then I heard the rustle of fabric. Natalie walked into the great room wearing her wedding dress. The dress was white and formal, cut clean and elegant with cap sleeves and a long skirt that moved over the stone floor in a quiet sweep. White roses rested in the bend of her arm. Her hair was down now, loose around her shoulders. Drop earrings caught the dim light. My grip on the pencil threatened to snap the wood. Fresh cedar dust clung to my palms, and the thought hit hard and immediate. One more look at her, and the words to cancel this whole charade would spill out before I could stop them. She walked the center aisle and stepped onto the platform. It did not creak. It held her perfectly. I stood there in a dust-covered gray t-shirt, tape measure at my belt, boots streaked with mud. She turned to face me under the string lights. The distance between us was less than 3 feet and wider than any canyon on the mountain. A tear slipped down her cheek. She did not ask about the schedule. She asked, "Do you regret letting me go?" Everything inside me went still. "Yes," I said. The truth landed between us with no place left to hide. Her shoulders shook once, then settled. "Good," she whispered, "because I never wanted you to." I stared at her. "What, when you left Seattle, I thought you'd gotten scared of my job, my life, all of it. I was waiting for you to ask me to choose. You never did. You just disappeared." Her fingers tightened around the bouquet. "I would have chosen you." The old belief I had carried for 3 years cracked clean through the middle. I didn't know that. "You didn't ask," she said softly. "You decided for me." Before I could answer, the lights flickered, buzzed, and died. The room dropped into darkness. Emergency strips glowed along the floor. My radio barked at once. "Cooper, the main transformer on the access road just blew. The whole property is off the grid." I grabbed my headlamp. Status on the primary generator behind the lodge. It tried to cycle on, but it choked. No power to the kitchen. No heat in the guest rooms. I looked at Natalie. In the low backup light, the rapid rise and fall of her shoulders gave her away. Cold air pressed in from the service hall, and 300 stranded guests suddenly became a practical problem, not an abstract one. "Stay by the wall," I said. "Don't move in the dark. I'll be back." Rain hit like gravel when I ran outside. The mud sucked at my boots as I crossed to the concrete pad behind the lodge and pried open the generator housing. My headlamp beam cut across the diesel engine. No manual needed. I checked the primer bulb. Soft. Fuel pressure loss. Probably sediment in the inline filter. I pulled the wrench from my belt, cracked the bleeder valve, and took the spray of diesel across my hands and jacket. The smell was sharp and oily in the freezing air. I cleared the sediment trap, tightened the valve, pumped the primer until the bulb went hard, then slammed the manual override. The engine coughed, sputtered, and roared to life. 30 seconds later, the breakers engaged. Light flooded the lodge windows behind me. I shut the panel and walked back inside, dripping wet, smelling of rain and diesel. Natalie was waiting just beyond the service doors with a stack of clean white towels. She stepped forward and set one over my shoulders. I caught the ends in both hands. My fingers were numb from the cold. Her fingertips brushed mine and stayed there for half a second, steady and deliberate. The room smelled like cedar-wet wool and hot metal from the kitchen stoves coming back online. The shaking in my hands eased before I finished my first breath. Then her phone rang. She glanced at the screen. "Julian." Her voice flattened. She answered. "Yes, Julian, the power is back on." A beat. Her brow pulled tight. "What do you mean the bridge is gone?" I keyed my radio. Status on the lower access bridge? Washed out Cooper. River breached the banks. Concrete pylons held, but the wooden deck is gone. Nobody is getting off this mountain until the county brings in a temporary steel span, and they are not coming in during this weather. Natalie lowered the phone slowly. The color had left her face. Julian is at the helipad behind the golf course, she said. He chartered a private Bell 407 out of Seattle. He paid them triple to fly under the weather radar. A Bell 407 carries 5 passengers, I said automatically. I know, her mouth went flat. He's taking himself, his CEO, and 3 board members to Seattle. The pilot has 1 seat left for me. He expects me to leave my parents, my sister, and 300 guests on this mountain so we can sign the marriage license in front of a photographer and protect the stock narrative. I said nothing. She needed to hear her own words. He said canceling outright would hurt the company. She gave a dry laugh with no humor in it. Half my family is trapped here, and he wants a cleaner press release. She did not cry. She slid the diamond ring off her finger, walked to the steel prep table, and set it down. The stone clicked against the metal. I'm not going. She turned toward me. The corporate armor was gone. She looked exhausted, frightened, and finally honest. She took 1 step. I opened my arms only after she crossed the last foot herself and pressed her palms to my sides. Hold on to me, I said quietly. She did. I wrapped her up and braced her against my chest. It was not hunger or spectacle. It was shelter. Cold fabric, damp hair, the steady drag of her breathing against my shirt, and the simple fact that she had stopped shaking. I kept 1 hand broad across her upper back and the other at her waist, anchoring rather than claiming. You're safe here, I murmured. After a long time, she stepped back and wiped at her face. I have to tell my parents. Then I have to tell 300 people. Take your time, I said. I'll make sure the kitchen has the generator load they need to keep the food safe. The next few hours were logistics and weather. Julian and his board members flew out at dawn. The sound of rotor blades beating across the valley felt like a line being drawn under her old life. When morning broke, the storm had passed, leaving behind a hard blue sky, a cold wind, and a missing bridge. The resort was isolated. The guests were warm-fed and going nowhere. Around noon, I was in the great room snapping latches on my tool cases. The cedar arch stood at the end of the room, solid and beautiful, and as far as I knew, useless. I assumed Natalie was upstairs handling the fallout of a canceled high society wedding. My job was done. Time to get back to work and out of her way. What are you doing? I turned. Natalie stood in the doorway wearing jeans and one of her father's oversized flannel shirts. She looked tired, but the hunted look was gone. Packing up, I said, then I'm heading down to the lower road to help the county assess the bridge. She walked in, eyes moving over the archway. You're not going anywhere. Natalie, you have enough on your plate today. You don't need me hovering. I don't need hovering, she said. I need execution. She came closer. We have thousands of dollars worth of food prepped. We have a 5-piece acoustic band trapped here. We have 300 guests with no way down the mountain. Her voice strengthened as the plan assembled itself. So the plan is, we do not waste this room. We do not waste the food, and we definitely do not waste the archway you built. We host a survival dinner tonight. Guests, resort staff, county workers, anyone who can get here. I looked at her and saw the strategist I had fallen in love with aimed in the right direction at last. I need you to turn the lights back on, Gabriel, she said softer now. I want to use the space we built. I let go of the case and crossed to the panel. The dimmer slid up under my thumb. The string lights came alive in a warm gold sweep across the stone and cedar. I need an hour to finish sanding the left handrail, I said. I left one rough edge. A real smile reached her eyes. Take your time. I'll tell the kitchen to start the fires. By evening, the great room had become something better than a reception. It was a warm, crowded survival feast. Catering staff turned the formal menu into a massive buffet. The band traded wedding standards for folk songs and bluegrass. Guests in expensive casual clothes shared tables with resort staff and county workers in wet boots. The whole room smelled of cedar, wood smoke, roast meat, and the last of the storm drying off coats by the fire. I stayed near the back, beside a stone pillar with a bottle of sparkling water, watching Natalie move through the crowd. She checked on the older guests near the hearth, redirected servers with a light touch, and laughed when a little kid tried to steal an extra biscuit from the dessert station. She was not performing, she was simply capable. Her father came to stand beside me with a glass of whiskey in his hand. "Julian sent a legal notice to my email an hour ago," he said mildly, threatening to sue the resort for the venue deposit. Negligence breached the usual ugly language. I set the bottle down. He has no grounds. The contractor abandoned the site. The pavilion failure is documented. The bridge washout qualifies as an act of God, and I have time-stamped structural photos, weather reports, and maintenance logs on the transformer and generator. I can pull the file right now and get copies to counsel. He took a sip and looked at me over the rim of the glass. I know, I'm a retired judge. I already drafted the response. His mouth shifted, not quite a smile. "I wanted to see whether you reached for optics or facts. You reached for proof. I had no good answer to that, so I gave him the truth. Natalie shouldn't have to carry this alone." "No," he said quietly, "she should not." He watched his daughter for another moment. She has never needed a man to rescue her from hard work. What she needs is a man who can recognize a real threat, stand his ground, and build something solid before everyone else finishes talking. He put a hand on my shoulder, once, firm and brief, then disappeared back into the crowd. I looked toward the archway. Natalie had stopped there beneath the lights, one hand resting on the cedar post. She found me across the room and held my gaze. No bright wave, no public performance, just one small nod that landed with more force than a speech. I walked to her. The band finished a song and the room naturally softened. Natalie stepped onto the platform and turned to face the crowd. "I want to thank all of you for making the best of a very strange day," she said. Her voice carried cleanly through the room. "We did not get a wedding, but looking around tonight, seeing people share food stories, blankets, and whatever else they had to spare, I think we got something better. We got a community." A murmur of agreement rolled through the hall. "But I have one specific thank you to make." She turned not to the room, but to me. "Last night, when everything was coming down and the man standing beside me did not ask for a contract, a deposit, or a spotlight, he picked up his tools, secured the building, brought the power back, and built a safe place for all of us to stand." She reached her hand toward me. "Liam Carter, he built this, and I am proud to stand beside him." She was not hiding me. She was not softening me for the room. In front of her family, my crew, and every important guest stranded on that mountain, she was making her choice in plain language. I stepped up and took her hand. Firm grip, warm skin, cedar under our feet. That was enough. I did not make a speech. I just stood there with her while the room answered with applause. Later, long after the last guests had gone to their rooms and the catering staff had cleared the tables, the great room settled into quiet. Embers shifted in the fireplace. The string lights hummed softly over the arch. Cold pressed at the windows, but it could not get in. Natalie and I stood alone beneath the cedar. I reached into my pocket and brought out a small brass key. "My cabin is on the north ridge past the tree line," I said. "Small place, wood stove, porch I built myself. Quiet enough to hear the snow before it reaches the roof." I looked at the key and then at her. "I do not have a corner office, Nat. I do not wear suits. I build things with my hands. But if you want a place where you never have to wear armor just to walk into a room, the door is yours." She looked at the key for one steady second, then took it and closed her fingers around the brass. She slipped it into the pocket of the flannel shirt and pressed her palm over it. "I don't want the corner office," she whispered, stepping closer. "I want the porch." I lifted my hand to the back of her neck and let my thumb rest lightly at her jaw. She leaned in first, close enough that her breath warmed the cold line of my cheek, and her eyes stayed on mine the whole time. "Gabrielle," she said, quiet and certain. That was all the permission I needed. I kissed her slowly. No rush, no spectacle, just the clear, steady arrival of something that should have happened years ago. Her hand came up to the side of my neck. Mine stayed gentle and sure. Cedar, wood smoke, soft light, and the old storm finally spent outside the windows, and the solid fact that neither of us was running now. When we finally drew apart, she rested her forehead against mine and smiled in a way I had never seen before. No performance, no armor, no negotiation. The next morning, the county engineers arrived with survey gear and a temporary steel span plan. The resort manager spent the breakfast hour apologizing to guests and handing out vouchers. Natalie spent hers at a long table in the lodge library with her father, the resort council, and me. Julian's legal threat lasted all of 11 minutes once we laid out the photolog weather reports, contractor abandonment emails, maintenance records, and the call sheet showing exactly when I red-tagged the pavilion. Facts did what facts always do when they are clean and timely. They shut down noise. By noon, the story that had started as a ruined wedding had turned into something else entirely. The county wanted copies of my structural notes for their insurance file. The resort manager wanted to retain me on a year-round contract for emergency infrastructure and custom work on the north buildings. Natalie, still in the flannel shirt with her hair twisted into a loose knot, sat beside me, flipping through the contract terms with a yellow pencil, calm and lethal in equal measure. She caught one indemnity clause, circled it, and slid the page to me. Too broad, she said. Agreed, I said. The resort manager looked between us and wisely changed the clause without argument. That afternoon, Natalie found me outside under the lodge overhang where I was checking the moisture content on a stack of replacement timbers the supplier had finally managed to deliver at the lower road. Wind came down off the ridge, carrying the smell of wet pine and cold stone. My mother wants to know whether you'll stay for dinner, Natalie said. I set the meter down on the tailgate. That sounds less like an invitation and more like a test. Her mouth curved. It's both. And your father? He already likes you, she said. You brought documentation to a legal fight and fixed a diesel generator in a mountain storm. You were always going to do well with him. I looked at her for a moment, and with you. She leaned one shoulder against the lodge pillar. You built an altar for a wedding that was falling apart, even when you thought I was walking towards someone else. You kept the resort warm. You gave me room to choose. You handed me a key instead of a demand. Her expression softened. Yes, Gabrielle, you're doing very well with me. Dinner turned into a long, loud meal with her parents, her sister, two stranded county engineers, and half the kitchen staff drifting in and out with extra bread and stories from the storm. Her mother insisted I take a second helping. Her father asked intelligent questions about cedar curing time, and then, without warning, thanked me for standing my ground when other men would have folded to a louder wallet. Natalie watched that exchange in silence, and the look she gave me afterward was quiet, open admiration, not infatuation. Respect, the kind that settles deep. After dinner, when the others had moved toward the fire with coffee and cards, Natalie found me at the back sink where I was rolling my sleeves and rinsing sawdust from a nick across my knuckles. She took a clean towel from the rack and handed it to me. You still managed to get hurt in very practical ways. Occupational hazard. Her gaze dropped to the cut and then lifted again. Thank you, she said. For what? For the coffee not becoming a speech. For the heater. For the towel when I needed one. For the generator. For not telling me what I should have seen sooner. She paused. For being steady when everything around me wasn't. I dried my hands and folded the towel once. You saw it when it mattered. She moved closer, stopping within arm's reach. I'm still angry that you left. That's fair. I'm also relieved you came back different. I let out a breath that almost passed for a laugh. I didn't come back different. I just stopped leaving before I was asked to. That earned me a slow, thoughtful look. Good. The temporary bridge went in 2 days later. Guests filtered off the mountain in waves. The band loaded their instruments. The florist salvaged what she could. The cedar arch stayed standing in the great room because the resort manager said tearing it down would be a crime. Natalie postponed every public statement until the legal paperwork with Julian was final. When she did speak, it was brief, factual, and impossible to spin. The engagement was over, No further comment. She did not mention optics. She did not mention stock price. She did not mention betrayal. She did not have to. 3 weeks later, she drove up to my cabin on the North Ridge in an old, borrowed SUV, still carrying mountain dust in the wheel wells. I was on the porch planing a handrail for the steps when I heard the engine cut off. The air smelled like cedar shavings, cold sun, and the first real hint of autumn. She stepped out wearing jeans boots and the same flannel shirt she had taken from the lodge. The brass key hung on a small ring from her finger. "You kept it," I said. She came up the porch steps and held the key out between us. "You said the door was mine." "It is." She looked past me into the cabin, then back at the valley, then at me. I gave notice on the Seattle apartment. I'm consulting remotely for 6 months while I decide what I actually want next. She tucked a strand of hair behind one ear. And before you ask, no, this isn't because I need rescuing. I can afford every version of my life. I'm here because this one is the first one that feels honest. The planer was still in my hand. I set it down on the bench. "Good." Her eyes narrowed with amused suspicion. "That's all I get? You want a speech?" "No." I stepped in, took the overnight bag from her shoulder, and opened the door. "Then come inside. The stove's hot. I cut cedar kindling this morning. Coffee's on." She looked at the bag in my hand, and then at the open door, and something soft settled in her face. "You remembered my order. 2 sugars now," I said. "You changed it last winter, the week you stopped pretending dark roast fixed everything." She stared at me for half a beat, then smiled.